Henneth lay sprawled on the floor, while the protagonist stood composed and smiling. He declared plainly that he was simply stronger and showed no gloating. Silence followed, and the gallery stared in stunned disbelief. The instructor's earlier praise faded as the result settled across the arena, and every gaze fixed on the fallen student and the victorious freshman. The gallery erupted, then fell silent as the protagonist remained standing and Henneth Harpulia lay sprawled. Spectators craned from the balconies, and a hand gripped the railing as voices muttered disbelief. The instructor studied the arena and noted neither combatant had used mana. He declared their abilities equaled current dragon slayers. He added Rudo Donatos had not used his best. Observers praised the protagonist's perfect movement posture and accuracy. They compared him to a high-ranking swordsman. The result settled over the arena, and every gaze fixed on both students. The gallery had stilled, but tension lingered as both students remained in view. Voices rose praising the protagonist's final, perfect swing, and a man smiled at the display. The protagonist considered Rudo Donato's blade work and thought it mirrored his master's technique. A shadowed figure's name then surfaced as embrace of the heavenly sword style. Another observer recalled a devilish talent no one could match. He then corrected himself and judged the child not merely genius but a monster, and the arena absorbed that verdict in silence. After the verdict, the gallery remained silent as observers processed the child's uncanny skill. Several onlookers imagined what they could teach if they trained such a prodigy. A handful of faces brightened at the prospect of mentoring the young fighter. The scene then shifted to the annex student cafeteria, where students gathered for meals. A loud clatter interrupted the room as a fork struck a plate with force. Henneth Harpulia slammed her hand down and demanded that they eat outdoors today. Her outcry drew stares and shifted the cafeteria's quiet into tense chatter. After the verdict, the gallery had remained silent as observers processed the child's skill. Several faces brightened at the prospect of mentoring the prodigy. The scene then moved to the annex cafeteria, where students gathered for meals. A fork struck a plate and drew a harsh clatter. Henneth Harpulia slammed her hand down and ordered they eat outdoors today. Her outcry pulled stares and turned quiet into tense chatter. At the table, Henneth mocked outdoor food, and the protagonist muttered he was broke. Students argued about free food and the value of money. Henneth imagined coins raining around her. The protagonist suspected Henneth came from a rich family. After the verdict, the gallery remained silent, and faces considered mentoring the prodigy. The scene moved to the annex cafeteria, where students gathered for a meal. Henneth Harpulia ate while imagining coins and assumed a wealthy background. The protagonist bristled at her words and winced while knocking his drink. An older student offered to buy food and mentioned Balaksteros could handle himself. Henneth snapped and rejected the kindness, calling the giver a filthy bourgeois. The room stiffened, then someone shouted they had found the student from earlier. After the verdict, tension lingered in the annex cafeteria as students ate and watched. Henneth Harpulia taunted a classmate while imagining wealth, and the protagonist flinched and knocked his drink. Two young men strode in and shouted to draw attention, calling out that they had found the student. They walked between the tables, announcing they were guild masters. One of them named himself Roderick Rodler and claimed the Pursuer Guild. The room murmured and stiffened. The protagonist answered the interruption by giving his own name as Rudo Donatos. After the interruption, the protagonist recalled two young hunters standing behind him. Roderick had been the heavenly archer, and Abel White the moon shadow. The protagonist recalled they died in the battle against the 7 dragons before he became a slayer. In the present, the green-haired man introduced Abel White aloud and teased that Abel was shy. Abel answered bluntly and objected that he was not shy at all. He watched them with a quiet distance and a memory of their names. The brief exchange eased the cafeteria's tension and underscored the protagonist's isolation. After the interruption, the protagonist again recalled the two hunters and their names. In the cafeteria, Henith Harpulia stood up and declared her name with a start. Balexteros replied with a polite greeting, while a green-haired student laughed and teased them. The brief jokes eased the room's tension and drew reluctant smiles from nearby trainees. The alumni shifted to explain they had returned to remember academy days and to visit old places. They said Lyana Chernica had returned after the sparring lecture and left immediately. The protagonist watched at a distance and felt the isolation deepen. After the earlier interruption, the alumni resumed light talk while the protagonist stayed at the room's edge. A green-haired student teased to ease the mood and then called out Rudd. The seated young man heard Abel's praise mentioned. A white-haired visitor moved forward and asked if Rudd knew him. He then named Rudd's ranks aloud, declaring him a fourth-ranking dragon slayer and the Clouded Moon Guild master. The announcement pulled attention toward Rudd and changed the table's tone. After the interruption, alumni resumed light talk while the protagonist lingered at the room's edge. A green-haired student leaned close and teased to ease the table's mood. Rudo Donato stepped forward and spoke, naming ranks and claiming guild leadership. The announcement drew every nearby eye to the seated young man at once. Rudo then praised the protagonist's match skill and offered a future place. Henith Harpulia watched with a guarded smile and processed the proposal quietly. The protagonist blinked, then sputtered a surprised question aloud to the room. After the interruption, the alumni resumed light talk while the protagonist lingered at the room's edge. Rudo Donato stepped forward and praised the protagonist's skill, then offered him a place in the Clouded Moon Guild. He argued rules were often ignored for talent and promised the guild would provide a larger stage. The protagonist questioned recruiting like that and declined, saying he had not chosen a guild. He thought a powerful guild might limit him and decided he would not bind himself before he knew his path. Silence wrapped the hall as alumni resumed idle talk and eyes turned to the protagonist. He asked Rudo Donatos to locate his older brother, the lone survivor of the disaster 10 years earlier. Rudo paused and asked what reward the task would bring. The protagonist offered only a promise, a good relationship with him. Rudo leaned back and measured that offer against influence and future alliances. Nearby students murmured and shifted, the green-haired trainee smirking. Rudo allowed himself a small smile, concluding that cultivating ties with a bright young man could prove advantageous. Silence lingered as alumni resumed idle talk and attention returned to the protagonist. He had asked Rudo Donatos to locate his missing older brother after the disaster. Rudo weighed that modest promise carefully against influence and future alliances across the hall. The protagonist smiled and said he hoped their good relationship would grow. Rudo then answered with a measured smile and a low, agreeable phrase to affirm it. Nearby students murmured, while a red-haired girl loudly joked about facing rankers. She waved a sheet and asked what letter the professor had distributed after class. Silence settled as the hall returned to low conversation and focus shifted back to small tasks. The protagonist concluded his exchange with Rudo Donatos, who had weighed the request about his missing older brother and replied with a measured, agreeable phrase. Nearby students murmured, while Henith Harpulia joked and waved a page. The protagonist's smile faded as he looked down at a wax-sealed envelope. He touched the seal and realized he'd forgotten the assessment notice for the first sparring lecture because of the sudden offer. He now had the summons he could not ignore. The protagonist inspected the wax-sealed envelope and realized it held the assessment notice for the first sparring lecture. He admitted he had forgotten to check it amid the earlier offer. Henith Harpulia teased him with a smile, then dismissed his worry outright. She said there was no need to open it and insisted it contained only good things. She suggested his family would be proud and then offered light reassurance. Students nearby murmured, and the room returned to muted focus and softened conversation. The protagonist's smile faded as a memory of his older sister in a coma surfaced. He felt the summons in his hands and could not ignore it. The protagonist had opened the wax-sealed summons and could not ignore it. Henith Harpulia smiled and dismissed his worry. Students murmured as the room returned to low conversation. Henith asked Rudo what sort of man his brother had been. Rudo called his brother an idiot, yet an indomitable dragon slayer. He said the elder suffered because of Rudo's incompetence but kept fighting. A flashback showed two boys walking across a dusty field. Rudo added his brother's power far exceeded his own. Henith suggested the brother might still be alive somewhere. The protagonist's smile faded as memories of his comatose sister returned. The protagonist had opened the wax-sealed summons and could not ignore it. Henith smiled and eased the room as students murmured and shuffled their letters. She urged the class to open their papers and began reading aloud. Her appraisal named a student a potential battle wizard with keen timing and measured magic. A second reader announced high-level martial arts skill and notable physical strength. A nearby voice joked about beautiful muscles and drew a few laughs. The protagonist's smile waned as thoughts of his comatose sister gathered at the edge of his mind. The protagonist had opened the wax-sealed summons and listened as Henith Harpulia guided the room through her reading. Students murmured while appraisals were revealed and ranks were called. One appraisal praised timing and magic, another praised martial strength. A nearby voice mocked beautiful muscles and drew laughter. The protagonist's smile dimmed as thoughts of his comatose sister pressed at the edge of his mind. Henith scoffed and demanded to see his paper. She snatched the sheet, scanned it quickly, and froze, eyes narrowing at an unexpected line. The protagonist opened the wax-sealed summons as Henith Harpulia read the room. Students murmured through the hall while appraisals and ranks were called aloud. Henith scanned the protagonist's paper and froze at an unexpected line. The protagonist left the hall and knocked on a heavy carved door. An attendant opened it and invited him in with a curt call. He stepped into a chamber where several figures sat around a long table. Conversation abruptly cut off and the room turned toward his slow approach. An older instructor steepled his fingers and said he had finally come. The protagonist held his stance and waited for the next command. The protagonist entered, and the group invited him to sit at the long table. An older man greeted him and asked if he was comfortable at the academy. A woman offered coffee and snacks while others smiled and teased him. A student warned Rudo to wear a jacket because it remained cold outside. The protagonist reacted quietly and fumbled his words when addressed. Conversations circled his presence. A voice suggested he choose an advisor. Faces watched him closely as he kept his posture and waited for the next command. The instructor explained the letter's sign and its meaning to the gathered students. He said freshmen were assigned to professors after the sparring class according to traits. A close-up revealed crested emblems and a stamped signature as proof of direct contact. A masked student noted that being contacted by every professor was rare. A woman laughed and reassured Rudo, praising his potential and saying student opinion guided assignments. Faces watched as the protagonist stayed, reserved, and waited for further instruction. The room shifted between formal briefing and light teasing about advisors. After the group lists and emblems were shown, portraits of 4 instructors filled the panel. The protagonist singled out Daniel Gold and remembered being chosen and taught by him in a past life. He formally asked to learn the way of the sword from Daniel Gold. The instructor commended the choice and addressed Rudo as the student representative. Rudo accepted the assignment but announced a condition before finalizing anything. The room held a mix of approval and curiosity as the decision hung between ceremony and negotiation. After the portraits and emblems had been shown, the protagonist stepped forward. He declared he would be taken as a direct disciple. The assembled students recoiled and stared in shocked silence. The instructor turned to Rudo and asked if he understood the implications. Rudo tensed under the room's attention and said nothing. The protagonist then stated there was no successor to the sky-piercing technique. His claim reshaped the decision into a challenge to tradition. The room filled with a tense hush as negotiation hung between ceremony and consequence. After the portraits and emblems had been shown, the protagonist stepped forward and claimed direct discipleship. The assembly recoiled, and the instructor turned to Rudo for an answer. A caption named the sky-piercing technique, an ancient dragon-slaying method reserved for one heir. The protagonist recalled his past life. He remembered Professor Daniel as the disciple of a legendary swordsman. That swordsman had trained his older brother and made him the expected heir. In the council room, a voice asked about the empty succession. The brown-haired man admitted he had planned to present the offer later. The protagonist answered simply that he needed power. After the council exchange, the protagonist sat and explained his true motive. He said he had been weak and that dragons had killed his friends and family. He admitted he might have saved them if he were stronger. He vowed not to witness loved ones die again. A caption asked if they would still be alive if he had been stronger. Memory cut to a grim forest where a girl shouted for Daniel to stand. Daniel Gold collapsed, others screamed, and a child crawled to a fallen figure crying. Memory cut to a ruined wood where Henith Harpulia clung to the protagonist as a dragon's maw loomed. She screamed sister and blood spat across the scene while lives collapsed. A caption questioned whether wanting power for revenge made one worthy. The protagonist resolved that power must protect others, not satisfy rage. The scene shifted to a council room where trainees sat at a table. The instructor declared Rudo Donatos his direct disciple, and the room fell silent. The protagonist's vow hung between them, measured and unresolved. Memory had cut sharply between the ruined wood and the council room. After the instructor named Rudo Donatos his direct disciple, debate rose among the trainees. A standing student proposed that all professors co-teach and supervise Rudo to unlock his potential. The protagonist shouted, while others argued that confining Rudo to one sword style would waste his talent. Some pressed to try every method to awaken him. Others warned that the arrangement would be unfair to classmates and spark discord around the table. Memory cut between the ruined wood and the council room. After the instructor named Rudo Donatos his direct disciple, debate rose among the trainees. A standing student proposed co-teaching to unlock Rudo's potential, while the protagonist warned that confining him to a single style would waste his talent. The instructor argued that creating a dragon slayer justified unfair measures and insisted bold steps were necessary to annihilate the dragons. When the protagonist protested the policy's inflexibility, the instructor dismissed likely complaints. A trainee loudly agreed and invoked Arthur's concurrence. A hand then extended an offer to Rudd, and another voice called it only an offer. The assembly told the protagonist his choice would be respected and offered support. He stood with a hand on his shoulder as doubts flared about the sky-piercing appointment. He questioned whether naming a single heir while accepting other professors as advisors was appropriate. He feared that other trainees' opportunities would vanish because of the decision. That anxiety threaded into his vision of the future and its possible disasters. He imagined a knight who could fight the dragons and stop the coming disasters. The room went quiet when a voice asked them to please take good care of him. After the assembly pledged support for his appointment, the protagonist accepted the weight of others' futures. He resolved to secure everyone's future by surpassing his own limits and becoming stronger at any cost. He envisioned a knight capable of fighting dragons and halting the coming disasters. Golden geometric rings and spiraling motifs framed his figure as resolve settled in his posture. He clenched his fist and let responsibility harden into firm purpose. He vowed to train with advisors, yet stand as leader if needed. In the hush of the hall, he pronounced he would become the knight the world needed.